had been trying to write a definition of juggling for years, but I never seemed to be able to come up with something that worked. The definitions that I wrote or that I heard from others, they were either too broad, so they included a bunch of stuff that we know are not juggling, or they were too narrow, so they didn't manage to encircle the things that are established forms of juggling. So it wasn't until I basically gave up on this and said that, okay, I don't know what juggling is, so I don't have an opinion anymore. And then I could instead take a look at what everyone else has to say about it. If you look at the meaning of a word, the meaning of a word is simply what a word represents to a group of language users. The problem in juggling is that there is no common understanding. You have many different understandings about what juggling is. So who are we going to listen to? That's the problem. I decided to look at what experts had to say about it, and I decided to look at what literature has to say about it, and I also wanted to see what are the iconic established forms of juggling. What are the clear reference points to what juggling is? If you don't know what something is, well, can you at least bring out some prime example? So I wanted to do that because I didn't want to be stuck with the situation that you write a definition and then you look at, for example, Enrico Rastelli, and your definition doesn't define him as a juggler. You have a problem then, that you have just exchanged one problem for another, and I didn't want to be stuck with that. So I took those sources, experts, literature, and iconic juggling, and I wrote a list of all things that are juggling according to those sources. It became a list such as Enrico Rastelli throwing and catching 6 plates while skipping rope, Paul Chinky-Wally throwing a bottle of water and catching it on an umbrella and opening the umbrella before the water spills out, so he's covered by the umbrella. Jenny Jäger throwing and catching 10 balls. Yuri Borsukin bouncing a ball on a platform that is on the top of a pole that is balanced on his forehead. Yeah, a lot of things on the list. And then I looked at that list and I thought that, is it possible to extract some common properties that all of these things on this list have? So what do they have in common? And if I managed to extract that, perhaps from that extraction I could compose a definition in some way. The problem with that is that juggling seems to have a certain flexibility. A common problem that jugglers like to tease each other with is they take a ball and they put it on the table and they say, what's that juggling? Is putting a ball on the table, is that juggling? And then someone will go, no, that's not juggling. Okay? Then the juggler will then take 4 balls and juggle them in a normal pattern that everybody knows is juggling. Place one of them on the table, continue with 3, pick the ball from the table up and continue with 4, and then do that continuously as a pattern. It's clearly juggling. So the problem of putting a ball on the table could then be juggling, but we all know, we come home from work, we put the keys on the table, we weren't juggling then, so what are you going to do? So I wanted to somehow, instead of writing something that defined putting a ball on the table either as a hard line that it is juggling or it's not juggling, because that's the choice that you have to make. I wanted to write something that somehow manage to deal with that flexibility. How can something be juggling in some context and not juggling in another context? I then took a look at, is there something that we all agree is juggling? And there is. There's a picture on the wall in the 15th tomb at the Beni Hassan gravesite in Egypt, and it's women that seem to be juggling. Are they doing a cascade, a shower, columns, 1 up, 2 up, 4, 2, 3? We don't know. We don't know the pattern. And of course there is the possibility that it's a black hole in the wall and they're holding 2 apples, or they're painting the black dot on the wall and they got greasy hands that they're showing off. There's a bunch of other possibilities, of course, but most people seem to agree on that this is juggling being depicted here, and they're throwing and catching balls. That's the activity. This is the oldest trace of juggling. If it's a cascade or a shower, that's juggling. No one has disputed that. So I thought that perhaps we can use this in some way. We take this kind of unique example that there's an understanding of and start from there and see if we can define juggling based on that. What also struck me with that is that let us assume that the women are doing a cascade. We don't know, but if that is assumed that it's a cascade that they're doing, a cascade is more primitive in a shower if you look at it from the aspect of components. A shower has 2 components. It's a throw, it's a high throw, and then a pass over to the other hand, and then you repeat that and you have a shower. Whereas a cascade is only 1 component. It's a throw and then the same type of throw that is repeated over and over again. So it's a little bit more primitive in that aspect. If I ask someone, can you juggle? A cascade is generally what's implied. Or if you're going to teach someone to juggle, normally you teach a cascade. That's the first thing you teach. So it is some kind of basic form in that regard as well. It's the basic form in another regard, which is that it's a technical foundation. Let's say you want to learn back crosses. The cascade is usually the first pattern that you practice with. If you're going to learn that, you're going to throw behind the back. The cascade is where you start. So it's somehow it's the principal form of juggling. And I thought that, okay, let's say if we call the cascade a default form of juggling, the default form of juggling, could that be somehow the start to a definition? So I spent some time thinking about that, and then I wrote a definition that instead of writing a bunch of properties such as juggling is throwing and catching, balancing, blah 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 blah, object manipulation, all these things that have been tried and tested in the past that hasn't worked for all the various reasons. Instead, I took the cascade and I saw that as the default form of juggling, and everything else that is juggling has some kind of relationship to the default form. That was the idea, that you have a default form and then everything else that is juggling because it has a relationship to this default form. So I'm going to read you the definition because I think that's pretty much all the background that you need to know in order to understand this. So, the definition of juggling. Juggling is a genre of related activities. The word juggling can represent either the genre or an activity of that genre. The activities are usually skill-based demonstrations of object manipulation, but it is not these characteristics that are conclusive in whether something is juggling or not. Historically, juggling in its default form is throwing and catching using the hands in repetitive cycles with at least one object more than the amount of hands. This pattern has become known as the cascade. The nature of juggling is similar to the nature of a melody. Both are defined by the composition between their components and not by the components themselves. A melody is not a single note, and juggling is not a single throw. With this understanding, we can resist falling into the trap of seeing components of juggling as juggling. A tire of a car is not a car, it's a tire. The same goes for juggling. A throw is not juggling, it's a throw. A throw can be juggling if it's combined with something or in some other way placed into the context of the default form. The most common example of this is when several objects are thrown continuously in a juggling pattern, such as a 3-ball cascade. Then the combination of components and the specific way they are combined make them belong into the category of juggling. A throw of one object without other objects or additional throws could be juggling if it is part of a certain context, such as a juggling performance. The crucial aspect of the context is that it is in a relevant relation to the default form. All activities that belong in juggling are related to the default form in some way. That is their common link. Juggling is the default form plus everything that is put into the context of the default form by, among other things, mimicking, referencing, expanding on, being influenced by, or in some other way relating concretely or abstractly to the default form. If that context is removed, so is the connection to juggling. So, that was the definition. There's two kind of notes, though, that I want to include. It is commonly known that the ability to juggle is achieved by practice. If the juggler is using secrets, such as gimmicks or hidden apparatus, the juggling is not considered to be authentic. It may still exist in the genre of juggling, but will be pushed to the periphery or over the edge into the genre of magic. Number 2. If there is another genre that has a stronger connection to the subject than juggling, the subject will be placed in that genre and not in juggling. If a subject has a strong enough cultural identity of its own, it can be independent and will not be referred to as juggling. So for example, skateboarding. You could draw a bunch of similarities between established juggling and skateboarding, but no one calls skateboarding juggling. It's not juggling because it has a strong enough cultural identity of its own. So people call it skateboarding. Another example could be rhythmic gymnastics that even share some of the objects, balls and clubs. Or cardistry has cultural identity of its own, and if we should place it, if we don't recognize that cultural identity, I think still that the connection to magic is stronger than to juggling. Yo-yo, another example. So yeah, that's it. If you want to discuss this, I suggest that you go to objectepisodes.com. Thank you very much.